Hey guys, tonight we are going somewhere that exists before everywhere else. Before the land, before the sky, before the sun, before the gods themselves had names or shapes or opinions about anything. Tonight, you are going into the mythology of ancient Egypt. All of it. From the first dark waters of creation, where nothing existed except a formless, infinite, deeply patient darkness, all the way through the great dramas of the gods, the murders and the magic, and the lawsuits that lasted 80 years, and down into the underworld, where your heart will be weighed on a scale and a creature made of crocodile. And lion and hippopotamus is standing nearby with intentions that depend entirely on what the scale says. That is tonight's journey, and it is one of the most strange, beautiful, and elaborately imagined mythological systems any human civilization has ever produced. Fair warning before we begin. Egyptian mythology is not a simple system. It is not one story with a beginning, middle, and end. It is 3,000 years of accumulated stories, regional variations, theological debates, merged deities, contradictory traditions, and the specific creative energy of a civilization that looked at the universe and decided the only adequate response was to invent approximately 2,000 gods. If you were an ancient Egyptian trying to navigate this system in real time, you would need a professional to help you, and that professional would be a priest, and the priest would have opinions, and the opinions would depend on which temple he worked for. You probably would not have found the theology restful, but you will sleep through it just fine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop a comment letting me know where you are in the world and what time it is as you listen. There is something genuinely wonderful about knowing that someone in Cairo and someone in Melbourne and someone in a quiet apartment in Chicago are all drifting off to the same primordial darkness tonight, to the same infinite stillness that existed before the Egyptian gods decided to do something about it. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are in the dark, not the comfortable dark of a room with the curtains closed, or the familiar dark of closing your eyes before sleep. This is a different kind of darkness, older than that, deeper than that, a darkness that is not the absence of light, but the absence of everything. There is no light here, because light has not been invented yet. There is no ground beneath you, because ground does not exist yet. There is no air, no wind, no sound, no warmth, no cold. There is only none, the primordial waters, the infinite dark ocean that the ancient Egyptians placed at the very beginning of everything, the formless, boundless, perfectly still substrate from which the entire universe will eventually emerge. None is not nothing. This is important. The ancient Egyptians did not begin their universe with a void with absence. They began it with something that was present but unformed, potential but unrealized, existing but not yet differentiated into the specific things that existence would become. None is dark water. You are floating in it, or perhaps suspended in it, or perhaps there is no meaningful distinction between floating and suspended when there is no gravity and no direction and no surface. The water is warm, not warm the way bath water is warm, but warm the way the universe is warm when it has not yet organized itself into hot and cold, warm as a default condition rather than a specific temperature. The widely accepted understanding of Egyptian cosmology places none as the foundational concept from which all creation emerges, not a god exactly, not a being with a personality or intentions, but the primordial substance that contains the potential for everything. Later Egyptian texts describe Nun as the father of the gods, though this is less a genealogical statement and more a cosmological one, acknowledging that everything that exists emerged from this original, undifferentiated condition. The concept of Nun never entirely disappears from Egyptian religious thought. The waters of Nun persist at the edges of the created world, and beneath it, always present, always the background against which creation is defined. The chaos that the ordered universe exists inside of, rather than replacing. You float in the stillness, and the stillness is absolute, and it has been absolute, for a duration that has no meaning because time has not been invented, either. Time requires change, requires sequence, requires before and after, and in Nun there is no before and after, there is only the perpetual, undifferentiated present of infinite dark water. This is either profoundly restful or profoundly unsettling, depending on your relationship with the absence of landmarks, and the ancient Egyptians seem to have experienced it as both simultaneously. The lesser-known detail about the Egyptian primordial waters that tends to produce genuine surprise is that Nun was imagined as containing within it seeds of all future creation, not as empty potential, but as a kind of cosmic womb in which everything that will eventually exist is already present in an unmanifest form. The sun is in there somewhere, unlit. The gods are in there, unformed. The Nile is in there, unflowing. Egypt itself is in there, unfarmed. The entire ordered universe exists in Nun, the way a tree exists in a seed present but not yet expressed, waiting for the particular condition that will allow it to begin becoming what it already is. Something moves. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. There is no sound, no light, no visible event. But somewhere in the infinite dark water, something that has been entirely still begins, very slightly, to not be still. The movement is as small as a thought forming in a sleeping mind, the first edge of intention in a space that has, until this moment, contained nothing but potential. Historians and theologians still wonder about the precise relationship between the different Egyptian creation accounts, the Heliopolitan tradition centered on Atum and the sun, the Memphite tradition centered on Ptah, and the creative power of thought and speech, the Hermopolitan tradition centered on 8 primordial deities, and whether these were experienced as competing accounts or as complementary perspectives on the same event, different windows into a mystery too large for any single story to contain. The water stirs. Something is about to happen. In 3,000 years of Egyptian religion, what happens next will be told and retold and elaborated and sung and painted on temple walls and carved in stone and whispered by priests in the inner sanctuaries of the most sacred buildings on earth. It starts here, in the dark, with a single movement in infinite still water. And the universe holds its breath, except it does not have breath yet, and that is precisely the problem that is about to be solved. The water stirs, and the stirring gathers itself into something more purposeful than accident. And out of the infinite dark ocean of Nun, a single point of land, appears the First Mound, the primordial hill, rising from the waters the way the black soil of the Nile floodplain rises when the annual inundation recedes and the ground emerges from beneath the water into the waiting air. This image land emerging from water, solid form rising from formless depths, was not chosen arbitrarily by the ancient Egyptians. They saw it happen every year. Every year the Nile flooded, and every year the flood retreated, and every year the black earth reappeared, and life began again on its surface. And the Egyptians looked at this annual event and recognized in it the pattern of creation itself. The original act replayed annually as reassurance that the universe was still working, that the first morning was continuing to be true. On the First Mound, alone in the universe, stands Atum. Atum is the self-created god, the god who existed in Nun as potential, as unmanifest presence, and who brought himself into being through an act of will that required no external assistance because there was nothing external. He is the complete, the finished, The totality his name carries, the sense of both being and not being, of something that contains within itself everything that will emerge from it. He is old, in the way that the universe is old, carrying in his face the particular weariness of something that has been present since before presence was possible. He stands on the first mound, in the first light, and there is light now, because Atum is a sun god. And where he stands, the darkness of none retreats, and he looks out at the infinite water surrounding him. And he does what any reasonable deity would do when confronted with the task of creating the universe from scratch. He sneezes and spits. This is not an embellishment. The Heliopolitan creation account, one of the oldest and most influential of the Egyptian cosmological traditions, describes Atum creating the first pair of gods, Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture, through a combination of sneezing and expectoration that has delighted scholars and confused theology students for 2 centuries. The widely accepted understanding of this creation event is that it reflects an ancient wordplay in the Egyptian language. The words for sneeze and spit were phonetically similar to the names Shu and Tefnut, respectively, suggesting that the myth preserved a linguistic connection between the act of creation and the names of the created. Atum breathes out Shu air, separates from the creator's breath. He spits out Tefnut moisture, separates from the creator's body. The universe begins as a piece of divine biology, intimate and slightly undignified, in the specific way that beginnings often are. You are standing on the first mound now, and the light here is the first light that has ever existed, pale and thin and extraordinary, the way light is extraordinary when it has never existed before and is meeting darkness for the first time. The darkness does not disappear entirely. It retreats to the edges, to the margins, to the spaces between things, where it will remain permanently as the background against which all light is defined. The water of none surrounds the mound in every direction, flat and dark and patient, undiminished, by the creation that is beginning in its centre. Atum looks at what he has produced, 2 small gods blinking in the first light, apparently as surprised to exist as everything else is. And the creative process continues with the momentum of something that has started and does not know how to stop. Shu, the air, and Tefnut, the moisture, are the necessary prerequisites for the next stage of creation, and they produce it Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. Here, the Egyptian creation story produces one of its most visually distinctive images. Nut arching over Geb in a long curved body, her fingertips touching the earth on one side and her toes on the other, her star-covered belly, the sky above the world, while Geb lies beneath her on the ground, his body the land itself, the hills and valleys of his reclining form becoming the topography of Egypt and the world. The lesser-known detail about the Nut and Geb myth that tends to produce genuine delight is the reason they are separated. In the original myth, Nut and Geb are so closely entwined, earth and sky pressed together, that there is no space between them for anything to exist. Shu, the air, physically lifts Nut away from Geb, holding her up to create the space in which the world can happen. This is why Shu is sometimes depicted in Egyptian art as a figure standing with his arms raised, holding the sky above his head. He is not celebrating, he is working, performing the continuous act of keeping the sky and the earth apart so that everything between them can exist. If Shu ever stopped, the sky and the earth would collapse back together and the universe would end. Shu is, among other things, the god of the structural necessity of air, and his job is permanent. Atum watches his creation with the complicated expression of a being who intended to make a universe, and seems to be succeeding, though the specific results were not entirely planned. This is one of the things the Egyptian creation myths convey with particular honesty. The universe was not designed from a blueprint. It unfolded through a series of acts whose consequences were not fully foreseen. And the gods who emerged from those acts were real beings with personalities and desires and conflicts, rather than programmed agents executing a plan. The universe has the particular texture of something that is happening, rather than something that was made, and the gods who inhabit it are navigating it as it goes, rather than managing it from outside. The first mound, beneath your feet, is warm from the first sunlight, and the sky above you, Nut's star-covered body, arching overhead, is beginning to fill with light. Geb's surface, the earth, extends in every direction as the waters of Nun continue to retreat, black and fertile, smelling of the river and the deep mineral richness of the oldest soil on earth. Historians still wonder about the precise relationship between the various Egyptian creation accounts, whether the Atum tradition, the Ptah tradition, and the Ogdoad tradition of Hermopolis were understood as mutually exclusive or as different perspectives on a mystery too large for any single narrative. The Egyptians seem not to have felt the need to resolve the contradiction, which either reflects extraordinary theological sophistication or a refreshing indifference to systematic consistency. Possibly both. The gods are gathering on the first mound. More of them are coming. They always are. The gods keep coming, arriving on the first mound with the particular energy of beings who have just come into existence and are still working out what that means, and the universe around them keeps expanding outward from this single point of light and land into something larger and more complicated by the moment. Geb stretches beneath you, the earth taking shape, and Nut arches above, and between them, Shu holds the air open with the patient determination of someone who understands that this is permanent employment. The first family of gods is assembling, and the family dynamics that are about to develop will drive the entire Egyptian mythological tradition for the next 3,000 years, with the sustained, dramatic energy of a saga that knows it has a very large audience and intends to earn the attention. You are now in the world of the Ennead the Nine, the divine family that forms the theological core of the Heliopolitan tradition, the most influential of the major Egyptian religious centers. The Ennead consists of Atum at the top, then Shu and Tefnut, then Geb and Nut, then the four children of Geb and Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set and Nephthys, plus in some traditions Horus the Elder, making 9 divine beings whose relationships, conflicts, and cosmic functions constitute the structural framework of Egyptian mythology. They are not a pantheon in the distant, abstract sense. They are a family, which means they love each other and resent each other and compete with each other, and occasionally do things to each other that require divine courts to sort out, and the mythology that results has the texture of a family saga conducted at cosmic scale. Geb and Nut produce their 4 children in a story that immediately introduces another layer of divine complexity. Ra, the sun god, who in the Heliopolitan tradition merges with Atum as the creative solar principle, declares that Nut cannot give birth on any day of the year, a restriction that would seem to make the divine children of the sky an impossibility. This is where Thoth enters, the god of wisdom and writing, who gambles with the moon for extra light and wins 5 additional days that exist outside the official calendar. On these 5 intercalary days, the 5 children of Nut are born: Osiris on the first day, Horus the Elder on the second, Set on the third, Isis on the fourth, and Nephthys on the 5th. The days outside the year, the days that the calendar cannot contain, these are the days when the most important gods arrive. The widely accepted historical fact about the Ennead is that this divine family was not simply a theological construct, but was deeply embedded in the political ideology of Egyptian kingship. The pharaoh was identified specifically with Horus during his lifetime and with Osiris after death, making every Egyptian king simultaneously a participant in the divine drama of the Ennead and the living continuation of the mythological story. The death and resurrection of Osiris, the conflict between Horus and Set, the restoration of cosmic order, these were not distant theological abstractions. They were happening in the person of the pharaoh, enacted through the rituals of coronation and burial that structured Egyptian royal life from the first dynasty to the last. You walk among the Ennead now, and the first thing you notice is how physically present they are. Egyptian gods are not vague spiritual forces or abstract principles. They are beings with bodies, with specific appearances, with faces you can look at and voices you can hear. They are distinguished from humans by scale. Gods are generally larger, more luminous, carrying in their bearing the particular authority of beings who do not have to negotiate with mortality, but they are not distant. They stand in the landscape with the same matter-of-fact presence as the river or the sky, and their personalities are as specific and recognizable as any character in any story you have ever heard. Osiris is before you first, and the impression he makes is one of gravity and gentleness. Combined, a tall figure with green skin, the color of new vegetation, wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, carrying the crook and flail of kingship with the calm authority of someone born to rule. Osiris is the god of the dead and the god of resurrection and the god of agriculture simultaneously. Because in the Egyptian imagination, these are not separate domains. Death and rebirth and the annual renewal of the land are all expressions of the same cosmic process, the same pattern of loss and return that the Nile demonstrated every year in its flooding and its retreat. Isis stands beside him, and the force of her presence is different, more contained, more focused, carrying within it the quality of concentrated intelligence that characterizes everything associated with her. She wears a throne on her head, because her name in Egyptian is the word for throne, and she is both the personification of the royal seat and the power that legitimizes the king who sits on it. Isis is the greatest magician in Egyptian mythology, possessing knowledge of spells and transformations that even Ra himself does not fully share. And her intelligence has a quality of practical application. She does not accumulate knowledge for its own sake, but uses it with surgical precision at exactly the moments when precision is required. Set stands apart from the others, and the space around him has a different quality, drier, more charged, carrying the particular atmospheric tension of the desert rather than the river valley. Set is the god of chaos, foreigners, storms, and the desert, depicted with the head of an animal that nobody has ever definitively identified. Not a dong, not a donkey, not any known creature, but something distinctly its own, the Set animal, existing in Egyptian iconography as a marker of the foreign and the unclassifiable. Set is not evil in any simple sense. He is necessary. He is the force that opposes order, and opposition is what makes order definable. And without Set, there would be nothing for cosmic order to be ordered against. Nephthys stands in Set's shadow with the quiet watchfulness of someone who has made peace with her situation. She is Set's wife, and Osiris's sister, and Isis's sister, and the goddess of the threshold of boundaries, of the space between things, of the moment of transition between life and death. She is less celebrated than Isis, but no less present, appearing at every critical juncture of the mythological story with a faithfulness and a precision that the story depends on without always acknowledging. The lesser-known detail about Nephthys that consistently surprises people is her role in the protection of the dead. She, alongside Isis, is depicted on coffins and sarcophagi as one of the two divine mourners flanking the deceased, her arms spread in a protective gesture that will shelter the dead through whatever comes next. She is the goddess of things that are ending and things that are beginning, the deity of the edge. Historians still wonder about the precise development of the Ennead theology, specifically whether the grouping of 9 deities was always the canonical form, or whether it developed gradually as different theological traditions were consolidated and different regional cults were absorbed into the dominant Heliopolitan framework. The family stands on the first mound in the first light. They are, as families go, already complicated. They are about to become considerably more so. Section 4. The family stands in the first light, and the universe is new, and the gods are present, and the question that any sensible universe eventually has to answer is, who keeps this running? The first mound is established. The sky is separated from the earth. The gods are assembled and already developing opinions about each other. But the actual machinery of the cosmos, the thing that makes day follow night and season follow season, and the whole ordered arrangement continue in its ordered way rather than collapsing back into the formless darkness of none. That machinery requires management. It requires someone to drive it. And in the Egyptian universe, the being who drives it is Ra, and the vehicle he drives it in is a boat, and the route he takes is the sky by day and the underworld by night. And the journey he makes every single day, without exception, is the reason you are alive, and the reason the universe continues to exist, and also the most exhausting commute in the history of divine employment. Ra is the sun god, and in the mature Egyptian theological tradition, he is also the supreme deity, the king of the gods, the creator who sustains what Atum began, the force that animates the cosmos through his daily passage. He is depicted as a falcon-headed man wearing a sun disk on his head, or sometimes as an old man in the evening, a mature man at noon, and a child at dawn, the three phases of the sun's daily journey mapped onto the three stages of human life, with the characteristic Egyptian tendency to find the cosmic in the personal and the personal in the cosmic. Ra does not merely illuminate the world. He is the world's organizing principle made luminous, the force whose presence makes the difference between existence and non-existence for everything that lives. The solar barque, the barque of millions of years, is the vessel in which Ra makes his daily journey, and you are aboard it now, standing on the deck in the first light of a new day somewhere in the eternal version of this voyage. The boat is magnificent in the specific way that divine objects are magnificent, not merely beautiful, but radiating a quality of significance that ordinary beautiful things do not carry. It moves across the sky with the smooth, certain motion of something that has been making this journey since the beginning of time and has never once been late, because being late would mean the sun failing to rise, and the sun failing to rise would mean the end of everything. The widely accepted historical fact about Ra and the solar mythology is that the daily journey of the sun was understood by the ancient Egyptians not as a natural phenomenon that happened automatically, but as an active, ongoing achievement that required continuous effort and divine will. The sun did not rise because physics demanded it. The sun rose because Ra travelled, because the gods aboard the barque maintained their stations, because the spells inscribed on the hull of the boat were spoken correctly, because the enemies of order that lurked along the route were defeated. Every sunrise was a victory. Every day of existence was the result of a battle that could, in principle, be lost. The crew of the barque accompanies Ra on his journey, and they are a remarkable assembly of divine specialists, each performing the specific function that the voyage requires. Thoth is aboard, recording the journey and managing the celestial navigation with the focused attention of a divine navigator who knows every star and every current. Ma'at is there, or rather, Ma'at is incorporated into the barque itself, her feather principle, the force that keeps the boat's direction true, the cosmic compass by which Ra steers. Sia, the god of perception, stands at the prow watching for obstacles. Heka, the god of magic, maintains the protective spells that keep the barque safe through the more dangerous portions of the route. You stand at the prow and watch the sky ahead as Ra begins his morning passage, rising in the east with the particular golden quality of light that the desert air produces, sharp and warm, and carrying in its colour the memory of the primordial fire from which it emerged. Below you, Egypt spreads in its long, thin ribbon of green beside the dark river, and the people on the ground are small and purposeful, and going about their morning business with the quiet confidence of people who know that the sun has risen and the day has therefore started correctly. The lesser-known detail about Ra's solar barque that consistently produces genuine interest is that Ra actually travels in two different boats, the Manjet, the day barque, which carries him across the sky from east to west during the daylight hours, and the Mesektet, the night barque, which carries him through the underworld from west to east during the night, so that he can emerge again in the east at dawn. The two boats are not merely transport, they are divine vessels with their own crews, their own protective spells, their own specific functions in the economy of the cosmos. The transition from one boat to the other at the western horizon where day meets night is one of the liminal moments of the Egyptian cosmic day, a threshold that the mythology surrounds with particular attention. As Ra crosses the midday sky, the heat on the barque's deck is the specific heat of Egyptian noon, absolute and total, the kind of heat that has no ambiguity about its intentions. Ra at noon is Ra at his most powerful and his most direct, and the light falling from the barque at this moment is not merely illumination, but a form of divine speech. The sun god communicating his presence to the world below with an emphasis that the world below cannot ignore. Then the afternoon begins its long descent toward the western horizon, and Ra's form changes, the young god of morning becoming the mature figure of midday, becoming the old man of evening, the sun's light shifting from gold to amber to the deep copper of the Egyptian sunset. The barque moves toward the western horizon with the deliberate pace of the irreversible, and the crew makes their preparations for the more demanding portion of the journey that is about to begin. Historians still wonder about the precise relationship between the solar mythology centered on Ra and the earlier creation. Theology centered on Atum, specifically the timeline and mechanism by which Ra and Atum were merged into a single deity, Ra-Atum, representing both the creative principle and the sustaining force of the cosmos. The sun touches the western horizon, and the barque crosses the threshold. The night journey begins, and somewhere in the darkness below, something very large and very old and very opposed to the existence of everything is waking up, and it is hungry, and it has been waiting for this moment since yesterday. The something very large and very hungry stirs in the darkness below the western horizon, and the night barque begins its passage through the underworld, and Ra navigates the 12 hours of darkness with the focused attention of a commuter who knows exactly which parts of the route are dangerous and has been dealing with them every night since the beginning of time without ever quite getting used to it. But tonight, the story is not following the barque into the underworld. That journey has its own section later, its own elaborate geography of gates and guardians, and the great serpent Apophis that awaits at the deepest point of the night. Tonight the story is turning away from the sky entirely and descending into something that happens on the ground, or rather just beneath it, in the mythological space where the most important and most devastating event in the Egyptian divine family's history is about to unfold. Osiris is king. He rules Egypt, divine Egypt, mythological Egypt, the Egypt that exists in the time before history, when the gods themselves walked the land with the gentle authority that is his defining quality, teaching his people agriculture, giving them laws, establishing the civilization that will make the Nile Valley into the breadbasket of the ancient world. He is beloved, which in Egyptian mythology is not a sentimental statement, but a cosmological one. The beloved king is the king around whom Ma'at organizes itself, the king whose presence is the condition under which order persists and life flourishes. Osiris is good at this. He is perhaps too good at it, in the specific way that exceptional competence in someone else tends to affect the people around them who are not exceptional and who are paying close attention to the comparison. Set is paying very close attention. The murder of Osiris by his brother Set is the central mythological event of Egyptian religion, the story from which the most important theological, funerary, and ritual traditions of the culture flow. It is told with variations across different periods and different regions, but the essential structure persists. Set, motivated by jealousy of his brother's power, and perhaps by something deeper and less articulable, arranges the death of Osiris through a plan that involves a beautiful chest, a party, and the specific vulnerability of anyone who is too trusting to imagine that their own brother is conducting a murder plot in the middle of a celebration. The widely accepted account of this event, most completely preserved in later sources that draw on much older oral traditions, describes Set commissioning a magnificent chest, a decorated wooden box made to the exact measurements of Osiris's body. At a feast, Set produces this chest and proposes a game. Whoever fits perfectly inside it will receive it as a gift. The guests try it one by one, and nobody fits. Then Osiris tries it, and of course he fits, because the chest was made for him. And Set's confederates slam the lid closed, and seal it shut, and carry it to the Nile, and throw it in. And the chest becomes a coffin, and the coffin becomes a boat, and the boat drifts downriver to the sea, and then northward along the coast to the land of Byblos, where it washes ashore, and a great tree grows around it, enclosing it within its trunk. And the king of Byblos cuts down the tree, and uses it as a pillar in his palace. And inside the pillar, sealed within wood, Osiris lies. You stand beside the Nile on the night of the feast, and the water is moving in its customary direction toward the sea, carrying the chest with it, and the darkness is the specific darkness of an Egyptian night, not the primordial darkness of none, but the inhabited darkness of a country that knows the sun will return in the morning, and is resting in the confidence of that knowledge. Except that tonight something has happened that disrupts the confidence, because the king is in a box in the river, and the river is carrying him away. And nobody knows this yet, except Set and his confederates, who are returning to the feast with the particular expression of people who have done something irreversible and are managing the knowledge of it. The lesser-known detail about the Osiris myth that consistently produces a pause in people encountering it is the tree at Byblos, specifically the detail that the tree grew so beautifully and smelled so sweetly that the king of Byblos used it for his palace, and that the fragrance of the tree was the fragrance of the divine body within it. The story gestures at something the Egyptian theological imagination was deeply interested in, the way divinity persists in matter, the way the sacred continues to radiate from the most apparently mundane container, the way you cannot entirely separate what something is from what it contains. Osiris in a pillar in a foreign palace is still Osiris, and his presence perfumes the wood around him and makes the tree extraordinary, even as it conceals him. Set returns to power, which is what he wanted, and the immediate practical consequences of Osiris's absence begin to manifest. The land changes, the floods become less reliable, the harvests are thinner. The quality of the light is different, not darker exactly, but less warm, as though the presence of Osiris in his role as vegetation, god, and divine king had been contributing something to the world's light that his absence now withdraws. The gods who remain are unsettled in the specific way that beings are unsettled when the organizing principle of their world is removed and the world keeps going but somehow feels like a version of itself rather than the actual thing. Isis knows something is wrong before she knows what it is. She is the goddess of magic and perception, and the wrongness is legible to her, the way a change in the wind is legible to someone who has spent their life reading weather. She begins her search with the focused, methodical quality that characterizes everything she does, moving through the world, asking questions, following the thread of divine intelligence that connects her to her husband, tracing the path the chest took down the river and along the coast to Byblos. Historians still wonder about the precise origins of the Osiris myth, specifically whether the story of the murdered and resurrected god grew from earlier agricultural myths about the death and rebirth of vegetation, from historical memories of early royal succession conflicts, or from something more purely theological, a story invented specifically to carry the weight of Egyptian funerary ideology. The chest drifts northward along the coast. The tree grows around it, fragrant and extraordinary. And Isis is already looking. Isis is already looking. And the looking has a quality unlike any ordinary search, because Isis is not merely a grieving wife conducting an investigation. She is the goddess of magic, the most powerful practitioner of Heka in the Egyptian universe. A being whose intelligence and capability exceed those of almost every other deity in the pantheon, and who is now applying the full force of everything she is to the single task of finding her husband. The search takes her north, along the path the Nile current carried the chest, along the coast of the Mediterranean, through territories that are not Egypt and not under the protection of Egyptian gods, into the foreign city of Byblos, where the chest has become a pillar in a palace, and nobody in the palace knows what is inside the beautiful smelling wood that the king chose for its fragrance. Isis arrives at Byblos in the disguise of an ordinary woman, which requires a suppression of divine radiance that must feel, for a goddess of her power, something like holding your breath indefinitely, and she sits by the well where the queen's servants come for water. She braids their hair. She breathes on them, and the breath of a goddess carries fragrance and grace that mere proximity to divinity imparts. And when the servants return to the palace, smelling of something extraordinary, the queen notices and wants to know where it came from. Isis is brought to the palace. She becomes nurse to the queen's infant son, and here the story produces one of its most distinctive mythological moments. Isis feeds the child not at her breast, but by giving him her finger to suckle, providing divine nourishment, and she holds him in the palace fire each night to burn away his mortality and make him immortal, which is a form of maternal care that most parents today would find difficult to authorize. The widely accepted understanding of this episode in the Osiris cycle is that it reflects a deeply held Egyptian belief in the transformative power of divine fire, not destructive fire, but purifying fire, the fire that removes the mortal and leaves the divine. The interruption of this process, which happens when the queen discovers what is occurring and cries out in alarm, breaking the ritual, is itself mythologically significant. The child loses the chance at complete immortality because his mother's love was not strong enough to withstand the sight of what the transformation required. Isis, in her divine patience, does not punish the queen. She reveals herself, the goddess, in her full radiance, the suppressed light released, and asks for the pillar. You are in the throne room of Byblos when the revelation happens, and the quality of light in the room changes instantly and entirely. The measured, warm, human light of a foreign palace replaced by something older and more fundamental. The light that Atum produced on the First Mound, translated through the presence of a goddess who was born in the time when the gods of Egypt were first assembling. The king and queen of Byblos prostrate themselves. The pillar is given. Isis takes it outside the city walls and opens it herself. And the opening, the first sight of what the chest contains after its long journey, produces in her a grief so powerful that the younger children of the king, who have followed to watch, die from the force of it. Grief, in Egyptian mythology, is not merely an emotion, it is a force with physical effects. Particularly, the the grief of a goddess who contains within herself the power of transformation, and whose transformation of grief into action is one of the mythological world's most consequential events. Isis takes the chest back to Egypt, to the Delta Marshes, and she performs the first act of magic that will eventually bring Osiris back, not to full life, not yet, but to sufficient presence that the next necessary thing can happen. She transforms herself into a bird, a kite, the bird of morning, and hovers over the body of Osiris. And through the power of her magic and the depth of her love, she draws from him enough of his essence to conceive a child. This child will be Horus, the young Horus, the Avenger, the future king, and his conception in the marshes of the Delta, while his father lies between death and not death, is one of the most theologically charged moments in Egyptian mythology. The lesser-known detail about Isis's magic in this episode that consistently surprises people is the specific content of the spells she uses. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world, carved on the walls of Old Kingdom burial chambers, preserve versions of the spells that Isis recites over Osiris's body, and they are practical, specific, and directed at particular problems: restoring breath, restoring warmth, restoring the ka and the ba, and the various components of the Egyptian soul that death had separated from their physical anchor. Isis does not pray for Osiris to come back. She instructs him to, with the precise, authoritative language of a magician who understands that the universe responds to correctly formulated commands rather than requests. Then Set finds the chest. He finds it in the Delta Marshes while Isis is away, and his response is the response of someone who thought the problem was solved and has just discovered that it is not. He cuts the body of Osiris into 14 pieces. Some versions say 16, some say 42, the number varying by tradition, and scatters them across Egypt, one piece in each nome, each administrative region, so that there is no single body to return to, no single location to guard, no possibility of another magical restoration. Isis receives the news, and her response is immediate and methodical. She begins the second search, the search for the scattered pieces, and she does not do it alone. Nephthys, her sister, joins her, and together the two goddesses travel through Egypt, finding the pieces one by one with the focused, determined patience of beings who understand that what has been scattered can be gathered, that what has been divided can be reassembled, that the fragmentation of Osiris is a problem with a solution if you are willing to do the work of finding it. Historians still wonder about the theological significance of the scattering of Osiris across the nomes of Egypt. Specifically, whether the distribution of his pieces across the administrative regions of the country was understood as a way of making every part of Egypt sacred, infusing the land itself with divine presence, transforming the geography of Egypt into a map of the divine body. She finds them, one by one, all but one, and the one that is missing is the one that cannot be replaced by any magic Isis possesses, which means the resurrection of Osiris will be real but incomplete, and the incompleteness will shape everything that comes after. The incompleteness shapes everything, and Isis gathers what she has found, and Nephthys helps her bind them together, and the reassembled Osiris is wrapped the first mummy, the original act of binding a divine body in linen for preservation, and what emerges from this process is not Osiris restored to life in the way he was before. It is something new. Osiris becomes the god of the dead, the ruler of the underworld, the divine king of the realm that every Egyptian will eventually enter, and his resurrection, partial, incomplete, achieved through the extraordinary effort of his wife's magic, becomes the theological template for every human resurrection, every Egyptian funeral, every act of mummification that follows for the next 3,000 years. Every person who is mummified is Osiris. Every person who dies undergoes what Osiris underwent. The myth is not merely a story about a god. It is the story that every human death participates in, the pattern that makes individual mortality cosmically meaningful. But the story is not finished, because there is a child in the delta marshes, and the child is growing, and the child is going to have opinions about what happened to his father. Horus, the young Horus, the child conceived in the marshes, the son of Osiris and Isis, is not the same being as Horus the Elder, who was one of the original Ennead. Egyptian mythology contains multiple Horuses, which is the kind of complexity that kept the ancient scribes employed and the modern scholars busy. But the Horus who matters for tonight's story is the young one, the Avenger, raised by Isis in the hidden safety of the papyrus marshes while Set rules Egypt and looks for them. Isis raises her son in concealment with the focused, protective energy of a mother who knows exactly what her child is for and what he will face when he is ready, which does not make the waiting easier, but gives it a quality of purposeful patience rather than mere endurance. Set does not know the child exists for a time. Then he does, and the knowledge changes the political and cosmic situation considerably, because a son of Osiris with a legitimate claim to the throne of Egypt is exactly the thing that Set's usurpation cannot comfortably coexist with. The confrontation between Horus and Set when it comes will be the defining conflict of Egyptian mythology, the contest that determines whether order or chaos will govern the universe, the question that the entire divine hierarchy has to assemble to answer. The widely accepted historical fact about the contendings of Horus and Set, the texts that preserve the most detailed account of their conflict, is that they read less like a heroic battle epic and more like a legal proceeding that occasionally breaks down into something more physical and then returns to the legal proceedings, with a cast of divine judges who are at various points baffled, exasperated, bribed, and manipulated by all parties involved. The dispute lasts 80 years. 80 years of divine litigation, shape-shifting contests, physical confrontations, appeals to higher authorities, counter-appeals, and the specific procedural chaos that results when the parties to a lawsuit are gods with the power to transform themselves into anything, and the legal system adjudicating them is staffed by beings who are doing their best but were not trained for anything quite this complicated. You are in the divine court of the Ennead, and the atmosphere is not what you might expect from an assembly of the most powerful beings in the universe. It is closer to the atmosphere of a committee meeting that has been going on for considerably longer than anyone planned, and in which several members have strong opinions and limited patience, and the chair Ra himself, presiding over the proceedings, seems to want the matter settled, but keeps being talked out of proposed solutions by one party or the other. Osiris, now ruling the underworld, sends increasingly pointed letters to the court from below, asking why the legitimate heir to his kingdom is still waiting while the court debates and the usurper sits on the throne. The letters have the quality of correspondence from someone who has been waiting for justice longer than is reasonable, and is beginning to express this in terms that are polite but unmistakably direct. Horus presents his case. He is the son of Osiris, the legitimate heir, the rightful king. Set presents his case. He is the strongest, the most experienced, the one who has actually been governing, and besides which the kingdom needs a warrior ruler, not a child, and has the court considered that? The divine judges consider both arguments with the judicial thoroughness that the situation deserves, and the judicial speed that it does not get. The lesser-known detail about the contendings that consistently produces genuine delight is the specific nature of some of the contests that punctuate the legal proceedings. At one point, Horus and Set agree to transform themselves into hippopotamuses and hold their breath underwater. The one who surfaces first loses. They stay submerged for 3 months. Isis, watching from the bank and worried about her son, throws a harpoon into the water, hits Set, then accidentally hits Horus, when he cries out in protest, and the whole contest is suspended while the resulting argument about what just happened is processed. At another point, the gods race boats made of stone, which sinks immediately, because Set cheats by making his boat from a painted mountain peak that looks like stone but is not. And Horus responds by transforming his own boat into stone in appearance only, and the whole competition collapses into a dispute about whether this constitutes cheating or inspired interpretation of the rules. Through all of this, Isis is working every angle available to her. She disguises herself to gain Set's sympathy and tricks him into acknowledging that a son should inherit his father's throne. A statement that Set immediately realizes applies to Horus and tries to retract, but the divine audience has heard it, and the admission hangs in the air of the courtroom with the particular authority of things said before witnesses that cannot be entirely unsaid. Historians still wonder about the original. Historical context of the contendings of Horus and Set, specifically whether the myth preserves memories of actual political conflicts between early Egyptian kingdoms, with different regions associated with the worship of Horus or Set, or whether it is primarily a theological document concerned with the nature of legitimate succession and cosmic order. The court deliberates. The arguments continue. 80 years pass in the way that 80 years pass in a mythological universe, not slowly, exactly, but with the specific quality of time that is being used, rather than simply elapsed. Time filled with events that matter even when the events are bureaucratic. Then someone finally makes a decision, and the universe reorganizes itself around it. The universe reorganizes itself, and Horus is declared the rightful. King and Set is assigned a new role: the thunder, the storms, the desert winds, the necessary opposition that keeps the cosmos from becoming complacently ordered, and the divine court disperses with the relieved energy of an institution that has resolved a matter that was beginning to affect everyone's. Productivity. The mythological world settles into its new arrangement, and Osiris rules the underworld with the quiet authority of someone who has been waiting for justice for 80 years and receives it with the composure of a person who knew, eventually, it would come. The world is organized, the positions are filled, the cosmic machinery is running, and then one of the most important pieces of the machinery wanders off. This is the story of the Eye of Ra, and it is one of Egyptian mythology's most fascinating and most structurally peculiar episodes. A story about a divine power that is simultaneously a part of Ra and separate from him. A goddess who is simultaneously his daughter and his weapon and his most dangerous asset, and the thing whose absence threatens the entire solar order. The Eye of Ra appears in multiple forms across Egyptian mythology. Sometimes she is Hathor, the goddess of love and music and the sky. Sometimes she is Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of destruction and war. Sometimes she is Tefnut, the original moisture goddess of the Ennead. Sometimes she is Wadjet, the cobra on the pharaoh's crown. What they share is this: they are all manifestations of a single divine force, the radiant, dangerous, a feminine power that Ra projects outward into the world, and that the world has very good reason to treat with considerable respect. The widely accepted understanding of the Eye of Ra in Egyptian theology is that it represents the active, projective aspect of solar power, the force that Ra sends out from himself to accomplish things in the world that he cannot accomplish from his position in the sky. The eye is the sun's rays understood not as passive illumination, but as active divine agency, capable of seeing, judging, destroying, and protecting, depending on what the situation requires. The pharaoh's uraeus, the cobra figure on the royal crown, is a form of the eye, a piece of Ra's protective power transferred to the king's person ready to spit fire at any enemy who approaches. The eye is simultaneously Ra's most powerful tool and his most autonomous aspect, a divine force that is genuinely part of him and yet genuinely capable of independent action. You are watching the particular version of the eye myth that involves her departure, the myth in which the eye, for reasons that vary by telling, becomes angry with Ra and leaves him, withdrawing into the distant desert or into the foreign lands to the south. And the consequence of her departure is that the sun loses something essential. Ra without his eye is diminished, not powerless, but incomplete, the way a fire is diminished when its brightest flame subsides. The world darkens very slightly. The divine order wobbles in a way that most beings can barely detect, but that Ra feels in every revolution of the solar barque. A wrongness in the system that nothing else can correct. Someone must go and bring her back. The god chosen for this mission is Thoth, the divine diplomat, the smooth talker of the Egyptian pantheon, the being whose facility with language and persuasion makes him the obvious choice for a negotiation that cannot be conducted by force. You go with him, travelling southward through the Egyptian mythological landscape into the foreign territories where the eye has gone in her anger, and the journey has the quality of a diplomatic mission to a destination that may or may not be receptive to receiving you. The lesser-known detail about the eye myth that tends to produce genuine surprise is the specific method Thoth uses to persuade her to return. He tells her stories. He sits with the angry, dangerous goddess in her foreign withdrawal, and he tells her fables and tales and myths and parables, each one designed to move her gradually toward the emotional state that will allow her to consider returning, the way a skilled therapist moves a difficult conversation toward understanding through careful narrative rather than direct confrontation. The Egyptian mythological tradition preserves collections of these persuasion stories, animal fables, and moral tales that Thoth supposedly told to the eye, and they are among the oldest examples of literary storytelling in human culture, produced for the specific narrative purpose of calming a goddess who could, if she remained angry, cause significant problems for the continued operation of the universe. The eye in her angry manifestation is Sekhmet, the lioness, the powerful one, the goddess whose fury, in another myth, nearly destroyed all of humanity before Ra stopped her by flooding the fields with beer dyed red to look like blood, which she drank in enormous quantities, became intoxicated, and fell asleep before she could complete the destruction. This particular episode, the near annihilation of humanity by a drunk lioness goddess who was stopped by beer, is simultaneously one of the most dramatic and most charmingly domestic moments in Egyptian mythology. And it reflects a recurring pattern in the tradition, crises of divine anger, resolved not through combat, but through the administration of something intoxicating at the right moment. You sit with Thoth as he tells his stories, and the goddess listens with the focused, dangerous attention of someone who is not entirely unwilling to be persuaded, but is not going to make it easy. The desert around you is the hot, dry desert of the Egyptian south, the landscape of Set and chaos and distance from the river's green order, and the eye in her withdrawn state has a quality that matches it fierce and beautiful, and carrying within her the specific danger of power that has been provoked. Thoth's voice is measured and warm, and carries the cadences of the oldest stories in the world. Hathor, the eye in her gentler form, is the goddess of love, music, beauty, and the sky, the divine embodiment of everything that makes life worth continuing. She is depicted as a woman with cow horns framing a sun disk on her head, or sometimes as a cow herself, the sacred animal whose nurturing qualities aligned with her mythological role. She is the goddess of the inundation's abundance, of the joy that follows the flood's retreat, of the music and dancing that Egyptian religious celebration expressed so consistently that the sistrum, the sacred rattle associated with Hathor, became one of the defining sounds of Egyptian religious life. Historians still wonder about the precise relationship between Hathor and Isis in Egyptian mythology, specifically the degree to which they were understood as separate deities with distinct personalities or as different aspects of a single divine feminine principle whose various qualities were distributed between them according to theological need. Thoth finishes a story, and the goddess laughs. It is a small laugh, barely audible in the desert stillness, but it is the sound of something easing, something releasing, the first indication that the mission is going to succeed. He begins another story. She listens, and the stories work their slow persuasion, and eventually the eye returns to Ra, because the stories Thoth tells are good enough and patient enough, and the goddess is not unmovable, only in need of the right approach, which is a lesson that Egyptian mythology returns to with great consistency, and the solar barque resumes its complete revolution with all its pieces in place, and the world is properly illuminated again. And Thoth walks back from the southern desert with the satisfied expression of someone who has completed a diplomatic mission that nobody else could have managed, and is too professional to make a fuss about it. Thoth deserves his own section of tonight's journey, and this is it, and he has been waiting for it with the patient, slightly amused composure of a deity who knows that the record is being kept, and that everything that is owed will eventually be credited in the appropriate column. You are in Thoth's realm now, the realm of writing, of wisdom, of the carefully measured word and the precisely recorded number, and the first thing you notice is the quality of the light here, which is lunar rather than solar, silver and cool and thoughtful rather than gold and warm and immediate. Thoth is a moon god as well as a wisdom god, and the connection between these two things is not arbitrary. The moon measures time in the Egyptian calendar, its phases mark the months, its fullness and decline provide a rhythm of cosmic accounting that the solar calendar alone cannot supply. Thoth is the god of time and the god of writing and the god of wisdom, because these things are, in the Egyptian imagination, the same thing. The measurement of what has happened, the preservation of that measurement, and the understanding that arises from the preserved record. The widely accepted historical fact about Thoth is that he was credited by the ancient Egyptians with the invention of writing specifically hieroglyphic script, and that this credit was not merely honorific, but theologically substantive. Writing, in the Egyptian worldview, was not a human invention that the gods approved of. It was a divine gift that the gods gave to humans, and the god who gave it was Thoth, and the reason he gave it was because the divine order required it. Maat, the cosmic order, could not be maintained without records. The divine courts could not function without documentation. The souls of the dead could not be properly processed without the written spells and declarations that guided them through the underworld. Writing was the technology of cosmic governance, and Thoth was its inventor and patron and primary practitioner. You are in Thoth's library, which exists in the mythological space adjacent to the divine court and the underworld simultaneously, a place where all records are kept, all knowledge is stored, all questions have answers, if you know how to find them. The library is vast, and its contents are not merely accumulated but organized, because Thoth's domain is not raw information but structured knowledge. The transformation of observation into understanding through the application of careful thought and precise language. The shelves extend in every direction with the mathematical certainty of a space that was designed rather than grown, and the scrolls and tablets they contain record not just human events, but cosmic ones, the movements of the stars, the decisions of the divine courts, the words of the creation spells that maintain the universe, the secret names that give power over divine beings. Thoth himself moves through this space with the unhurried attention of someone who has read everything here, and will read all of it again because the reading is never finished. The understanding is never complete, and the pleasure of careful thought in the presence of good records is one of the reliable pleasures of an immortal existence. He is depicted most commonly as a man with the head of an ibis, that white bird with the long curved bill that you may remember from the very beginning of tonight's journey, moving through the Nile shallows with an air of mild superiority. The ibis was associated with Thoth because of the shape of its bill, which resembled the crescent moon, and because of its behavior, methodical, precise, hunting with the focused attention of a being that knows exactly what it is looking for and does not waste movement. The lesser-known detail about Thoth that consistently surprises people is his role as a mediator and arbitrator. In divine conflicts, not just the Horus and Set proceedings, where he was clerk of the court and occasional negotiator, but throughout Egyptian mythology, wherever a dispute required resolution. Thoth was the being called in when the situation had gone beyond the capacity of the parties to manage themselves, the divine diplomat and judge whose authority derived not from power but from impartiality and from the possession of all the relevant information. He was the only being in the Egyptian pantheon who could reliably be trusted to have all the facts and to apply them without preference, and this combination made him indispensable in ways that more obviously powerful gods were not. Thoth's connection to magic Heka is as important as his connection to writing, and in the Egyptian tradition, these two things are closely related. Words have power in the Egyptian universe, and specifically words spoken correctly by someone who knows their true meaning have the power to affect reality directly. Written words preserve this power in a fixed form that can be carried, buried with the dead, inscribed on amulets and temple walls. The magical texts of Egypt, the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, the Book of the Dead, are attributed to Thoth or associated with his wisdom because they are the technology by which humans access the divine order. The written keys to doors that only exist because Thoth knows where they are and was willing to share that knowledge under specific conditions. In the divine court, Thoth serves as the scribe who records the verdicts. In the underworld, he records the result of the weighing of the heart. In the solar barque, he manages the celestial navigation. In the mythological universe at large, he arbitrates, records, calculates, and speaks the words that need to be spoken at the moments when words are the only thing that can change what is about to happen. Historians still wonder about the precise origins of Thoth's association with the moon, specifically whether he began as a purely lunar deity whose wisdom and writing associations developed later, or whether the moon and wisdom were connected in the theological imagination from the beginning. The silver measuring light of the night sky, always already associated with the divine accountant, who tracks the movements of everything. The library is quiet, the records are in order. Thoth picks up a reed pen and adds something to a scroll that has been waiting for this particular annotation. The universe is, for the moment, correctly documented. The universe is correctly documented and the records are in order, and Thoth sets down his reed pen with the satisfied precision of someone who has completed an entry that needed to be completed, and the mythological world breathes with the comfortable regularity of a system that is, for the moment, working as intended. The divine court has its records, the underworld has its administrator, the solar barque has its navigator. The cosmic machinery is running with the smooth, impersonal efficiency of something that has been running for a very long time and has been well maintained, and then you walk out of the library and the light changes and the sound changes and the mood changes entirely, because tonight the story is moving away from the administrative and the judicial and the cosmological and towards something warmer and more immediate and considerably more festive. Because Egyptian mythology was not only about creation and death and cosmic conflict and divine bureaucracy, it was also about joy. It was about music and dancing, and the particular pleasures that the gods associated with these things so thoroughly that entire theological traditions grew up around the experience of celebration, and the goddesses who presided over these traditions were among the most widely worshipped, most immediately present, most personally beloved figures in the entire Egyptian pantheon. You are entering the domain of Hathor, and the first thing you notice, the absolute first thing, before the colour and before the sound, is the smell. Flowers, specifically, and the particular warm floral heaviness of an Egyptian garden in bloom, lotus and lily, and something sweeter underneath, combined with the smell of incense from 100 small offering fires and the clean animal warmth of sacred cows moving through a temple precinct, with the serene authority of animals that have been sacred for so long they have stopped noticing. The sistrum is playing that sacred rattle of Hathor, its looped metal frame strung with small jingling rods that produce a sound somewhere between a rattle and a chime, used in her temples to accompany singing and to drive away malevolent spirits. Because Hathor's domain is joy, and joy is itself a form of protection against the forces that prefer misery. The widely accepted historical fact about Hathor is that she was one of the most widely worshipped deities in the entire Egyptian pantheon, not just among the elite or the priestly class, but among ordinary Egyptians across every social level and every historical period. Her cult centers at Dendera in Upper Egypt were among the most important religious sites in the country, and her worship was conducted not only in great temples, but in domestic shrines, at mining sites where workers prayed to her as protector, at the mouths of harbours where sailors asked her blessing, in the celebrations that punctuated the Egyptian ritual calendar with a frequency and a festivity that suggest a religious tradition genuinely oriented toward the experience of pleasure as a form of divine encounter. Hathor is the goddess of love, but love in the Egyptian sense encompasses more than it often does in modern usage. It is not primarily romantic love, though it includes that. It is the force of attraction that holds relationships together between humans and gods, between the living world and the divine order that sustains it. Hathor's love is what makes the world inhabitable, what transforms the bare cosmological machinery of Ra's solar barque and Thoth's cosmic records into a world that is worth living in. She is sometimes called the Eye of Ra in her nurturing aspect, the solar radiance understood not as burning but as warming, not as illuminating but as gladdening. You are at a festival of Hathor, now the beautiful festival of the valley, which the Egyptians celebrated annually with a procession of the divine barque from the Karnak temple complex across the Nile to the mortuary temples of the West Bank, where the living visited the tombs of their dead to eat and drink and celebrate in the presence of the divine and the ancestral simultaneously. This is one of the most revealing moments in Egyptian religious life, the festival in which the boundary between the living and the dead becomes permeable, and the appropriate response to that permeability is not solemnity, celebration, feasting, music, the kind of joy that says the dead are still present, still part of the community, still deserving of the same pleasures that the living enjoy. The lesser-known detail about Hathor's worship that consistently produces a particular kind of warmth in people encountering it is the role of music as a specifically divine language in her cult. The priestesses of Hathor were trained musicians, singers, and sistrum players, and dancers whose performances were not entertainment in the secular sense, but ritual acts, forms of communication with the divine that worked through sensory pleasure rather than through speech or sacrifice. The sound of the sistrum in Hathor's temple was understood as the sound of the goddess herself, her voice translated into percussion, her presence made audible. To hear it was to be in her company, and the company of Hathor was understood as profoundly beneficial healing, protective strengthening the vital force of everyone within its range. Bastet moves through this section of the story with the fluid, unhurried grace of a cat who has decided that the current location is acceptable and intends to remain here indefinitely. Bastet is the cat goddess originally depicted as a lion or a lioness, gradually transformed in the later periods of Egyptian religion into the domestic cat form that became one of the most recognizable images in the entire tradition. She is the goddess of home, of protection, of the domestic sphere, and the specific pleasures of household life, and her cult center at Bubastis in the Delta was, as you may recall from our earlier Egyptian journey, the site of the most joyful religious festival in the entire Egyptian calendar, the festival attended by hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, conducted with music and wine and the specific communal festivity that Hathor and Bastet together presided over. The cats of Bubastis move through the temple precinct with the independent authority of animals that have been sacred for centuries and have absorbed the lesson of their own sacredness so completely that they no longer bother to perform it. They are simply themselves, which is, in their context, a form of divine presence that requires no additional justification. Historians still wonder about the precise theological relationship between Hathor and Bastet, specifically whether they were understood as distinct deities with separate domains or as different aspects of the same divine feminine principle expressing itself in different registers, the cosmic and the domestic, the solar and the lunar, the fierce and the gentle. The sistrum keeps playing. Someone nearby is singing, and the song is one of the oldest forms of religious expression in the world, a human voice addressing a divine presence through melody, asking for nothing specific, simply acknowledging that the presence is real, and that the acknowledgement itself is a form of gratitude. Hathor listens. She is, by all available evidence, pleased. The song fades into the warm temple air, and the sistrum quiets, and the festival light softens toward the long Egyptian afternoon. And you stand for a moment in the specific quiet that follows celebration, the particular stillness of a space that has recently been full of joy and is now returning to its ordinary sacred state, like a room after a party where the warmth of the gathering still lingers in the air even though the people have gone. Hathor's presence recedes to its background hum of generosity and warmth, and the light shifts from the amber of festival torches to something cooler, more considered, and you become aware of a presence at the edge of the scene that has been there the whole time, patient and precise, and waiting with the composure of a being for whom waiting is not a cost, but simply the appropriate condition for the current moment. Anubis has been here all along. He is always here, at the edges of things, at the boundaries between states, at the precise location where one condition becomes another. He is the jackal-headed god, specifically the black jackal, the colour of the bitumen used in mummification, and the colour of the fertile Nile silt, and the colour of the night that contains the stars. And he is the god of embalming, of the funeral rite, of the careful preparation of the dead for what comes next. He is not a frightening figure in the Egyptian tradition, or not primarily. He is a protector, the guardian who ensures that the transition from life to death is made correctly, that the body is prepared with sufficient care, that the soul has what it needs for the journey. He is the divine mortician, and in the Egyptian understanding, the mortician is one of the most important figures in the cosmic order. The widely accepted historical fact about Anubis is that he was, in the earlier periods of Egyptian religious history, the primary god of the dead, the original ruler of the underworld, later superseded in that role by Osiris, as the Osiris myth became the dominant theological framework, after which Anubis retained his specific functions of embalming and funerary protection while Osiris took over the broader governance of the realm of the dead. This transition from Anubis as Lord of the Dead to Anubis as divine embalmer under Osiris's administration is one of the most interesting examples of theological evolution in Egyptian religion, a shift that happened gradually over centuries as the Osiris cult grew and the divine bureaucracy reorganized itself around the new supreme deity of the underworld. You are in the embalming house now, the Ibu. The place of purification and the work being performed here is the most theologically elaborate practical procedure in any ancient culture. Mummification was not merely a technical process for preserving a body. It was a ritual reenactment of what Isis and Anubis did for Osiris, a theological performance in which each step corresponded to a mythological event and each action was accompanied by spoken spells that activated the transformation the physical procedure was performing. The embalmers were priests as much as craftsmen, and the head embalmer wore the mask of Anubis during the most sacred portions of the ritual, literally becoming the god, channeling the divine embalmer's authority into the specific human body being prepared. The process took 70 days, a number that was not chosen arbitrarily. 70 days is approximately the period during which the star Sirius, associated with Isis, was invisible below the horizon before its annual heliacal rising, its reappearance in the pre-dawn sky that marked the beginning of the Nile flood season. The mummification period was the period of Sirius's absence, the time during which the body, like the star, was in transition between states, being prepared for its own reappearance in a transformed form. The synchronization of the funeral process with the celestial calendar was not coincidental but deliberate, a way of aligning the individual human death with the cosmic rhythms that gave it meaning. The lesser-known detail about mummification that consistently produces genuine fascination is the treatment of the internal organs. The organs removed from the body, the stomach, the intestines, the lungs, the liver, were not discarded but preserved separately in 4 vessels called canopic jars, each protected by one of the 4 sons of Horus: Imzeti, who had a human head and protected the liver; Hapi, who had a baboon head and protected the lungs; Duamutef, who had a jackal head and protected the stomach; and Kebehezenuf, who had a falcon head and protected the intestines. The heart was left in the body always the heart, because the heart was the seat of the mind and the conscience, and would be needed for the judgment scene that awaited the deceased. The brain was removed through the nose using a hook and discarded, because the Egyptians did not identify the brain as the seat of thought or consciousness, a theological position that modern neuroscience would presumably find interesting. Anubis moves through the embalming house with the focused, unhurried attention of a divine specialist who has performed this procedure on every human being who has ever died in Egypt, or rather, whose divine pattern every human embalmer is reenacting when they perform it on any specific individual. He checks the quality of the natron, the natural salt used to desiccate the body, with the evaluative attention of someone who knows exactly what correctly prepared natron looks and feels like. He examines the linen wrappings, each layer placed with precision and accompanied by the corresponding spell, each amulet inserted at the correct anatomical location with the correct words spoken over it. The amulets placed within the wrappings are themselves a minor theology, each one a physical object carrying a specific protective or empowering function that would activate in the afterlife. The heart scarab, placed over the heart, carried an inscription asking the heart not to testify against its owner at the judgment. The Djed pillar, representing the backbone of Osiris, provided stability. The Wedjat eye, the eye of Horus restored after his conflict with Set, provided protection and wholeness. The mummy was not simply a preserved body. It was an armoured vehicle for the soul's journey, equipped at every point with the divine technology required for what came next. Historians still wonder about the precise development of mummification as both a technical practice and a theological ritual, specifically the relationship between the physical techniques, which improved substantially over the 2,000 years of the practice's peak period, and the theological framework, which remained relatively stable while the technical execution became increasingly sophisticated. The 70 days end, the body is wrapped, the amulets are in place, the canopic jars are sealed and set beside the mummy in their chest, the four sons of Horus standing their eternal guard over the organs they were assigned. Anubis steps back and regards the completed work with the composed satisfaction of a being who has done his part correctly and knows it. The soul is ready for what comes next. And what comes next is the underworld. And the underworld is ready for it. Section 12. The underworld is ready, and the soul is prepared. And the journey that every Egyptian has been preparing for since the moment they could understand preparation begins now, in the specific way that the most important journeys begin not with fanfare, not with ceremony, but with a single step into a space that looks, at first, like simply the continuation of the world you already know, and then gradually reveals itself to be something else entirely. You are dead. Not in any alarming sense, tonight's death is the comfortable, narrative death of a story that needs to take you somewhere inaccessible to the living, and the somewhere in question is the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, the realm of the dead, the cosmic space through which Ra's night barque travels every evening and through which every human soul must navigate after the body has been properly prepared and the funeral rites correctly performed. The Duat is not underground in any simple physical sense. It is another dimension of the Egyptian cosmos, existing simultaneously below the earth and beyond the western horizon, and within the body of Nut herself, depending on which text you consult and which theological tradition it belongs to. The Egyptian underworld is not located, it is entered, the way you enter a dream, by crossing a threshold that the living world contains but cannot see. The threshold is behind you now. The Duat extends in front of you as a landscape that has the quality of Egypt, the same river, the same reeds, the same darkness broken by fire, and the same silence broken by sound, but intensified, made more significant. Each element carrying a weight of meaning that the ordinary Egyptian landscape carried only occasionally, and this one carries all the time. The path ahead is divided into 12 hours, 12 gates, 12 regions of the underworld, through which you must pass before reaching the judgment hall where your fate will be decided. And each hour has its own character, its own guardians, its own challenges, and its own name. The widely accepted understanding of the Egyptian underworld comes primarily from the texts the Egyptians themselves produced to navigate it. The Amduat, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, the Book of the Dead, a library of afterlife cartography written and illustrated over many centuries that constitutes the most detailed description of a death journey in any ancient religious tradition. These texts were not theoretical. They were practical maps and instruction manuals for the specific challenges the soul would encounter, collections of spells and passwords, and correct responses to the questions that the guardians of each gate would ask. The wealthy had full versions of these texts inscribed in their tombs or written on papyrus scrolls placed in their coffins. The less wealthy had abbreviated versions. The very poor had whatever they could manage, because some guidance was better than none, and the underworld did not accept ignorance as an excuse. You approach the first gate, and it is guarded. The guardians of the underworld gates are among Egyptian mythology's most visually spectacular inventions, beings that combine animal and human features in configurations that the Egyptian artistic tradition rendered with extraordinary confidence, as though the combination of a snake's body and a human head was simply a type of being that existed rather than a conceptual experiment. These guardians have names long, compound names in the ancient Egyptian language that describe their functions and their specific dangers. And the correct response to encountering them is to address them by name, because knowing the true name of a being gives you power over it, and the spells of the funerary texts are largely collections of these names and the correct formulas for deploying them. The first hour of the duat has a quality of transition. You are newly arrived, still carrying something of the living world's quality, and the landscape around you is not yet fully committed to its underworld character. There are fields here, and water, and a sky of sorts, a dark sky without sun, illuminated by the stars that are the souls of the justified dead who have completed the journey successfully. These star souls move with a steady, unhurried purpose that suggests settled existence rather than ongoing transition, and their light is cool and silver and deeply reassuring in the specific way that evidence of others having succeeded is reassuring when you are attempting the same thing. The lesser-known detail about the Egyptian underworld that tends to produce genuine surprise is the region called the Realm of Sokar, one of the darkest and most difficult sections of the duat, presided over by the funerary god Sokar, which in the Amduat tradition occupies the 4th and 5th hours of the night, and is described as a region of such total darkness that even Ra's barque cannot illuminate it, navigating through it on sand runners rather than water, because there is no river here, no water, only the deep, dry darkness of the most inaccessible part of the underworld. Ra passes through this region in a form so deeply compressed, so concentrated, so reduced to his essential divine nature, without any of the outward expression of that nature, that the Amduat describes him as curled within the body of a great serpent, travelling through the darkness in what amounts to a state of divine latency, present but unexpressed. You navigate through the hours one by one, and each one asks something of you, a name spoken correctly, a formula recited without error, an identity confirmed against the records that Thoth keeps in his library and that the underworld guardians have access to through mechanisms the texts describe but do not fully explain. The funerary spells are your equipment for these challenges, and the amulets within your wrappings are your armor, and the heart scarab over your heart is the most important piece of protection you carry, because the heart's testimony at the judgment is the one thing you cannot control through magical preparation alone. The 6th hour, the deepest midnight of the underworld journey, is where Ra and the souls of the dead share their most intimate moment, the moment when the solar barque pauses in its journey and Ra speaks to the dead around him, and the dead respond, and the contact between the solar principle and the individual souls is as close as it ever gets. The moment when the divine sustaining force of the universe touches the individual existence, it sustains with something approaching personal acknowledgement. Historians still wonder about the relationship between the various underworld texts and traditions, specifically whether the Amduat's 12-hour division, the Book of Gates' emphasis on barriers and passwords, and the Book of the Dead's focus on the deceased individual's own preparation and agency were understood as different descriptions of the same underworld, or as different theological models that existed in parallel without anyone feeling the need to reconcile them. The 12th hour approaches, and with it the end of the journey's navigational phase, the passage through the gates and the hours and the guardians completed, the spells spoken, the names known, the challenges passed. Ahead is the hall where the final determination will be made. The hall is lit from within. The light inside it is not solar and not lunar, but something else, the light of pure divine attention, of cosmic focus, directed at the specific question of what you are worth. You walk toward it. You walk toward the light, and the light receives you, and the hall of two truths opens around you with the particular quality of a space that has been designed entirely around a single purpose and achieves that purpose with complete architectural conviction. It is large, larger than any earthly building, large in the way that spaces in dreams are large, expanding to contain what needs to happen in them rather than constraining it. The walls are covered with hieroglyphic text and painted images that you recognize from the funerary papyri you studied in your preparation. The scenes of the judgment, the scales, the gods assembled as witnesses, the monster waiting in the corner, except that here they are not representations of what happens, but the actual thing itself. And the difference between the image and the reality is the difference between a map and the territory, and you are in the territory now. The 42 judges are assembled. They sit in 2 rows along the length of the hall, 21 on each side, each one presiding over a specific category of wrongdoing, each one waiting to hear your declaration. These are not anonymous divine bureaucrats. They have names and they have jurisdictions, and they have been doing this for as long as the dead have been dying, which in the Egyptian understanding is since the first human being finished their first life and arrived here needing to be assessed. The hall smells of incense and something older, the dry, mineral smell of the deep underworld, the smell of stone that has never seen daylight, and underneath it, the specific quality of divine attention, which has no smell exactly but registers in the body as a heightening of awareness, a sense that every detail of your presentation is being observed with complete accuracy. The widely accepted understanding of the judgment scene in Egyptian funerary theology is that it combined 2 distinct but complementary procedures: the declaration of innocence before the 42 judges, and the physical weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at into a single ritual of moral accountability that was simultaneously theological and ethical, simultaneously about cosmic order and individual conduct. The judgment was not arbitrary. It was not determined by the gods' preferences, or by wealth or social status. It was determined by the actual content of the life that had been lived, as preserved in the incorruptible record of the heart, which could not lie to the scales, even if the soul before the judges attempted deception. You speak the negative confession, addressing each of the 42 judges in turn, and the declarations you make are the declarations that every Egyptian soul made in this hall, the ancient moral inventory of a civilization that had thought carefully about what constituted a good life and encoded that thinking into the most consequential speech act in its entire religious tradition. You have not caused suffering. You have not stolen. You have not lied. You have not caused anyone to weep. You have not committed violence. You have not been impatient. You have not been greedy. You have not spoken ill of the king. You have not reduced the grain measure. You have not moved boundary markers. The list continues 42 declarations, each one addressed to a specific judge, each one covering a specific domain of human conduct, and the cumulative picture they build is not merely a list of prohibitions, but a portrait of what the Egyptians believed a decent human life looked like. The judges listen. Then the scales are revealed. The great balance stands at the center of the hall, its beam perfectly horizontal, its 2 pans empty and level. Anubis stands at the balance with the precise attention of a being who has calibrated these scales against the weight of the feather of Ma'at more times than any number can express, and who knows with absolute certainty that the calibration is perfect and that the result will be exactly what the result will be, no more and no less. The feather of Ma'at white, small, impossibly light, the physical embodiment of cosmic truth and justice and right order, is placed on 1 pan of the balance. Then Anubis takes your heart. The heart in Egyptian theology is not the physical organ alone, it is the IB, the seat of the mind and the conscience, the repository of every thought and action and intention of the life that has just concluded, the record that cannot be falsified because it is the life itself compressed into a single object. The heart knows what you did. It knows why you did it. It knows the difference between the action and the intention, and it carries both, and the scale will weigh both. And the feather of Ma'at does not negotiate. The lesser-known detail about the weighing of the heart that produces a particular quality of reflection in people encountering it is the heart scarab spell. The spell, inscribed on the amulet placed over the heart during mummification, addressed directly to the heart itself, asking it not to testify against its owner. The spell acknowledges explicitly that the heart contains evidence of wrongdoing. It does not pretend that the deceased lived a perfect life, and it asks the heart to exercise the same discretion that the soul is trying to exercise before the judges. It is a piece of magical damage control, an attempt to manage the testimony of your own conscience, and it is one of the most honestly human documents in the entire Egyptian funerary tradition. The recognition that even the most prepared, most pious Egyptian knew their heart contained things they would prefer the scales not see too clearly. Thoth stands ready with his reed pen and his palette, prepared to record whatever the scales determine. The ibis head is turned toward the balance, with the focused attention of a scribe, waiting for the result that will determine what he writes next. His record is the permanent one. The result of this judgment will be inscribed in the divine archive and will stand as the final assessment of the life just completed. Amit waits in the corner. Amit is the devourer, the gobbler, the creature assembled from the three most dangerous animals of the Egyptian world, the front half of a crocodile, the rear half of a hippopotamus, the middle a lion. She is not a deity, not exactly. She has no cult, no temple, no worshippers. She serves a single function in the entire cosmic order, and she performs it with the patient readiness of something that exists for exactly one purpose and has never been asked to do anything else. If the heart is heavier than the feather, if the scales tip toward the heart and away from Ma'at Amit eats it, and the soul ceases to exist, and this second death is the one the Egyptians feared most profoundly, not because it was painful, but because it was permanent. The total erasure of a person from existence, rather than merely the end of their earthly life. Historians still wonder about the degree to which the judgment theology was understood as genuinely universal, applying equally pharaohs and peasants to priests and farmers, or whether in practice the wealthy and powerful had access to magical preparations that gave them a meaningful advantage in the judgment, effectively creating a two-tier afterlife system in which those who could afford the best funerary texts received the best guidance through the underworld. The scales move, the balance settles. Anubis reads the result with the composed attention of someone whose job is to read results accurately, not to feel them. Thoth writes, and the reed pen moves across the divine record with the precise, unhurried strokes of a scribe who has been doing this since before human beings existed, and who will be doing it after the last human being has passed through this hall. And the result he records is the result that tonight's journey requires the heart balanced, the scales level, the feather of Ma'at, and the weight of a life lived in sufficient accordance with its principles, achieving the equilibrium that allows the soul to proceed. Amit, in the corner, subsides with the composed patience of a being whose purpose is not to devour, but to ensure that the possibility of devouring makes the judgment real, and her composure is the composure of the unused safeguard rather than the disappointed predator. The doors at the far end of the Hall of Two Truths open. Horus, the young Horus, the Avenger, the restored king, the divine son, who won the 80-year lawsuit, and whose victory established the cosmic order that this judgment operates within, takes your hand. He leads you forward through the doors with the gentle authority of a guide who knows exactly where he is going and has done this particular escort a great many times. And the light beyond the doors is different from the light of the judgment hall, warmer, softer, carrying in its quality the specific luminosity of a place where the sun never sets and the floods always come and the grain is always ready to harvest and the people you love are already there, waiting, with the patient certainty of people who knew you were coming and have been making sure everything is in order for your arrival. You have arrived in the field of reeds. The field of reeds Aru in the Egyptian is the Egyptian afterlife in its fullest, most beautiful expression, and the first thing to understand about it is that it is not the abstract paradise of later religious traditions, not a realm of pure spirit or undifferentiated divine presence. It is Egypt. It is specifically, recognizably, lovingly Egypt, the black soil and the green fields and the wide brown river and the blue sky and the palm trees and the ibis in the shallows and the smell of the flood's aftermath and the warmth of the Egyptian sun falling on. Egyptian earth. The Egyptians imagined the best possible existence as a continuation and perfection of the existence they already had, which is either a failure of imagination or a profound affirmation of the life they were living, and you can decide for yourself which it is, though the answer that requires the least cynicism seems most likely to be correct. The widely accepted understanding of the field of reeds is that it was conceived not as a place of passive rest, but as a place of continued activity, specifically agricultural activity, the work of the fields that structured Egyptian life so completely that existence without it would have felt incomplete rather than liberated. The deceased in Aru farm the divine fields, tend the divine crops, participate in the divine version of the agricultural cycle that the Nile makes possible. The floods come at the right time. The seeds germinate without failure. The harvest is always adequate. The work is the same work, but the anxiety is gone, the uncertainty is gone. The fear of drought or flood or crop failure or tax collector is gone. And what remains is the labour itself, the physical engagement with the living world. Without any of the suffering that surrounded it in ordinary life, you stand in the field of reeds and look at the landscape around you, and the resemblance to Egypt is so precise and so warm that for a moment the entire journey, the death, the embalming, the 70 days, the underworld passage, the 12 gates, the judgment hall, feels not like a departure, but like a return. Not to the specific Egypt of your specific life, but to the essential Egypt, the Egypt that the Egyptians carried in their hearts as the model of what existence should be. The Egypt where the river always gives, and the sky is always the right shade of blue, and the gods are present in their temples, and everything is as it should be. The lesser-known detail about the field of reeds that consistently produces genuine reflection is the role of the shabti, the small funerary figurines placed in Egyptian tombs, in sometimes extraordinary numbers. Each one a small mummiform figure carrying agricultural tools, each one inscribed with a spell, instructing it to answer for the deceased when the divine foreman called workers for the fields of Aru. The spell says, essentially, when you are called to do agricultural labour in the afterlife, I will do it for you. And the figurine will answer, here I am whenever the call comes. Wealthy Egyptians were buried with hundreds of shabtis, one for every day of the year, plus overseers to manage them, a complete afterlife workforce in miniature. Because the wealthy in life were not required to do their own agricultural labour, and apparently saw no reason why the afterlife should change this arrangement. The field of reeds was democratic in principle, but its practical operation had the same social stratification as Egypt below. The people you knew are here. This is the aspect of the Egyptian afterlife that the texts emphasize with the most emotional directness, not the cosmic architecture or the theological procedure, but the reunion. the specific human comfort of finding in the afterlife the people whose absence made ordinary life bearable but not complete. Parents and children, and spouses and friends and beloved animals. The Egyptian funerary tradition included provisions for pets to be mummified and buried with their owners. Cats and dogs and even ibises prepared with the same care as their human companions, so that the reunion in Aru would be complete, are all present, having completed their own journeys at their own times. And the meeting in the field of reeds has the quality of the best kind of recognition, the kind that requires no explanation because both parties already know everything that matters. Ra passes overhead in his solar barque, and his light falls on the field of reeds with the particular quality that divine solar light has in the Egyptian sacred geography, warm, sustaining, intimate in the way that the relationship between the Egyptian people and their sun god was always intimate, the relationship of people who live under a sky whose central feature is immediate and powerful and daily present. In Aru, Ra's passage is not something that requires constant magical maintenance to continue. It simply is. The cosmic machinery that was so precarious in the living world, maintained by spells and rituals, and the daily labour of the priests and the nightly battle against Apophis, is, in the afterlife, simply the way things are, stable and continuous, and requiring nothing from the souls who benefit from it, except the enjoyment of its effects. Historians still wonder about the precise relationship between the individual soul's experience of the field of reeds and the collective cosmic order maintained by Ra and Osiris, specifically whether the souls in Aru were understood as participants in the ongoing maintenance of that order, contributing through their presence and their activity to the continued functioning of the universe, or whether they were purely beneficiaries of a cosmic stability that operated independently of them. The fields extend to the horizon in every direction, green and gold, and the river moves through them with its customary patience, and the sky above is the specific deep blue of an Egyptian afternoon, and the people you love are nearby, and the work is good work, and the sun is always at the right angle, and there is no reason to hurry. There never was, there never will be, there never was any reason to hurry, and in the field of reeds this truth is finally, completely available without the competing pressures that made it difficult to fully inhabit in ordinary life, the labour service and the tax collector, and the flood that came at the wrong time, and the harvest that fell short, and all. The other urgencies that made the living world a place of continuous negotiation between what was needed and what was available. In Aru, the negotiation is resolved permanently in favour of sufficiency, and the soul can simply be what it always was, without the friction of insufficiency around it. But the story is not ending here, because the Egyptian mythological universe does not end in the field of reeds. The field of reeds is where individual souls arrive and rest and continue, but the cosmos that contains the field of reeds is itself something that requires maintenance, and the maintenance is not finished, and will not be finished. And the force that threatens to undo everything, not just the individual soul's afterlife, but the entire created universe. From the First Mound to the solar barque to the Hall of Two Truths to Aru itself, is still present, still active, still making its nightly attempt to destroy the order that makes existence possible. Its name is Apophis. Apophis Apep, in the older form, is the great serpent of chaos, the embodiment of the dissolving darkness that existed before Atum rose on the First Mound, and that has never accepted the creation of the ordered universe as a permanent arrangement. He is not a god. He has no cult, no temple, no worshippers, no festival, though the Egyptians held periodic rituals specifically designed to destroy him symbolically, burning effigies of the serpent with the focused theological conviction that the ritual destruction contributed to the actual cosmic containment. He is the opposite of existence, not death, which in the Egyptian understanding was a transition within existence, but the absolute negation of the conditions that make existence possible. He is what was before the universe, and what would be again, if the universe failed to maintain itself against him. The widely accepted understanding of Apophis in Egyptian mythology is that he lived in the underworld through which Ra's night barque travelled, specifically in the deepest hour of the night, the hour you passed through in the Duat. The hour of maximum darkness, waiting at the same point in the journey every night, with the patient, absolutely certain intention of stopping the solar barque and preventing the sun from rising. Every night, Ra must pass through Apophis's territory. Every night, the great serpent attacks. Every night, the crew of the solar barque, aided by the spells of the priests in the temples on the surface, the ritual destruction of Apophis effigies, the spoken and written words of the funerary texts, defeats him. Every night, the sun continues its journey. Every morning, the sun rises. You are in the deepest hour of the underworld now, and Apophis is present as a pressure in the darkness, rather than a visible form, a coiling, immense presence felt in the air before it is seen, the specific quality of a darkness that is actively hostile, rather than simply the absence of light. The solar barque moves through this darkness with the focused, urgent care of a vessel navigating through the most dangerous portion of its route, the crew at every station, the spells active, the divine weapons ready. Set, yes. That Set, the god of chaos and the desert, the murderer of Osiris, the loser of the 80-year lawsuit, stands at the prow of the night, barque as its primary defender against Apophis. Because the force capable of fighting chaos is chaos itself, directed and controlled, and Set's nature makes him the only member of the divine crew genuinely suited to this specific confrontation. The lesser-known detail about the nightly battle with Apophis that tends to produce a particular kind of contemplative stillness is the Egyptian ritual practice that accompanied it. Every night in Egyptian temples, priests performed the ritual of the hours, the reading of specific spells corresponding to each hour of the night, designed to support Ra's barque through its underground journey and to contribute to the defeat of Apophis at the critical moment. The priests did not perform these rituals because they thought they might help. They performed them because they knew they were necessary, because in the Egyptian cosmological framework, the universe was not self-sustaining but required the continuous participation of human ritual to maintain its integrity. The temples were not merely places of worship, they were engines of cosmic maintenance, and the priests who served in them were workers in the most fundamental infrastructure project in the universe, without which the sun would not rise. Ma'at is tonight's final subject, and she deserves more than a closing paragraph and less than an entire section, which is the appropriate proportion for a principle that is simultaneously everywhere in Egyptian thought and impossible to fully explain in any single articulation. Ma'at is the goddess, and Ma'at is the principle, justice, truth, right order, cosmic balance, the proper relationship between all things, and her feather on the scales of judgment is only the most visible expression of a concept that the Egyptians found in every correctly functioning thing. The Nile flooding at the right time was Ma'at. The sun rising was Ma'at. A fair judgment in the human courts was Ma'at. The pharaoh ruling justly was Ma'at. The priest performing the ritual correctly was Ma'at. The dead soul having lived well enough to pass the judgment was Ma'at. Everything that functioned as it should, everything that was in right relationship with everything else, everything that maintained the ordered, living universe against the formless dissolution of Apophis, all of it was Ma'at. All of it was the ongoing victory of order over chaos that the Egyptian mythological universe staged, every day and every night. Since the first morning when Atum rose on the First Mound and the darkness retreated to the edges, historians still wonder about the ultimate Egyptian theological vision of the universe, specifically whether the eternal struggle between Ma'at and Apophis was understood as genuinely endless, a permanent condition of existence requiring permanent maintenance, or whether some versions of Egyptian eschatology imagined an end point, a final resolution in which chaos was permanently defeated and the universe settled into an eternal stability that required no further effort. The night barque moves through the deepest darkness, and Set stands at the prow, and Apophis coils in the dark, and the spells are spoken, and the priests in the temples on the surface read their hours into the Egyptian night, and the stars above the underworld, the souls of the justified dead. The successful travellers who arrived in Aru and were given their place in the permanent sky keep their positions with the steady faithfulness of things that have found where they belong and intend to remain there. The barque moves forward. The darkness does not stop it. The dawn is coming at the far end of the night, and it is the same dawn that has been coming since the first morning, and it will come tomorrow and the day after. And for as long as the priests speak their spells, and the souls live well enough to balance the feather, and the gods do the long, continuous work of keeping the universe from dissolving back into the formless dark waters of none. The first light touches the eastern horizon. The ibis is already in the shallows, moving through the reeds with its deliberate, unhurried step, its curved bill pointed toward the water, its white feathers catching the first gold of the morning sun. The river moves, the universe continues. It is enough. It is always enough. And now, with all of that gently behind you, the primordial waters and the first mound and the sneeze that made the universe, the family of gods and their 3,000-year drama, the solar barque making its patient daily journey, the hall where hearts are weighed against feathers, and the green fields of Aru where everything you ever loved is simply there, simply present. In the warm Egyptian afternoon, you can let it all settle into the particular stillness that very large and very beautiful stories leave behind when they have finished being told. The Egyptian mythological universe is still there, still running, still maintained by the nightly battle and the daily sunrise, and the river that keeps moving, and the ibis that keeps wading through the shallows with its ancient, composed indifference to everything except the next careful step. You do not need to carry any of it. Let your breathing find its own rhythm now, slow and even and unhurried as the Nile in the dry season, moving without urgency toward wherever it is going, which is the sea, which has always been waiting, which is not a destination so much as the place where the journey becomes something else. Let the weight of the day settle into the surface beneath you, the way silt settles to the bottom of still water, slowly, completely, without resistance, finding its resting place. The darkness around you is not none's darkness. It is the comfortable darkness of a room that knows you are in it and is keeping you safe. The sounds you hear are the sounds of the living world going about its patient business outside your door, no different from the sounds that surrounded Egyptian farmers sleeping in their mud brick houses 4,000 years ago, when the same stars turned above them and the same river moved in the dark below. You are warm. You are still. Somewhere in the field of reeds, the grain is tall and the light is exactly right, and there is no reason at all to be anywhere other than exactly where you are. The ibis is in the shallows. The sun will rise. Sleep now.